Continuing with Valmiki's Ramayana, Balakanda, Chapter 3. Valmiki composes the great poem. Valmiki touched water to purify himself. He then spread darba grass on the floor and sat on it facing the east. He closed his eyes and went into a deep trance. He thought of the task assigned to him, and he told himself, "As the Lord has commanded, I will compose the poem in the meter which came to my mind and in the shloka form. It will be the story of Rama and his achievements, and I will name it the Ramayana." The more he thought about it, the clearer became his vision and his intellect, and he could see with his mind's eye all the many events which had taken place. He could visualize the old King Dasarat with his wives around him, looking at his 4 sons with eyes filled with joy and pride. And he saw Rama and Lakshmana with Sita in the Dandaka forest. It was as clear to him as the palm of his hand. The great Rishi related to the world the glorious history of Rama, and the poem was full of noble thoughts and noble deeds, like the ocean is full of rare and costly gems. Valmiki remembered the manner in which Narada had spoken of Rama, and in the same strain he composed the Kavya. It was made up of beautiful sounding words, words which were pleasing to the mind as well as to the ears, words which were faultless in their formation, and their meaning was as clear as the waters of a placid lake in the Himalaya. In a short while he was able to compose the poem. He had completed the epic Ramayana, which spoke of the story of Rama, of the killing of Ravana. There were 24,000 verses, shlokas, in the Kavya, and the Rishi was pleased with what he had done. He divided the Kavya into 6 sections. 500 chapters were needed to relate the story in its completeness. After the completion of the Kavya, Valmiki was wondering about the proper person who would be able to recite the poem and thus propagate it. Even as he was thinking on it, 2 youngsters, Kusha and Lava, came to his presence, prostrated before him, and took the dust of his feet. The youngsters, who were princes, had been with the Rishi to learn the sacred lore. They had very attractive voices, and since they were twins, their voices blended together well. To them, Valmiki taught the Kavya by name Ramayana. They learned it, and they sang it to the accompaniment of the Veena. They sang like Gandharvas. These 2 handsome, sweet-spoken boys with their large eyes were the sons of Rama. After they had learned the entire Kavya, the youngsters began to travel from ashram to ashram, singing all the while the story of Rama. Once, Rama was performing the great yajna by name Ashwamedha, the horse sacrifice. The young princes, dressed in tree bark and deerskin, went to the spot, and there, in the midst of the many rishis assembled there, they sang the Ramayana. The rishis listened with tears in their eyes to this glorious tale, filled with all the 9 emotions which a kavya should have, and they praised the youngsters. The fame of these 2 young boys was the only topic of conversation among the rishis and others who had heard them, and the news reached the ears of Rama the king. He saw them too with their Veenas, and he heard their voices from a distance. His curiosity was soon kindled, and he sent for them. They came to his palace, and he welcomed them. In the council hall was seated Rama, surrounded by his ministers and his dear brothers. He had assumed the garb proper for one performing the yajna, and he was charmed by the looks of the youngsters. He spoke to his brothers and said, "They glow with a radiance which is unearthly, and their voice is heavenly too. Let us listen to them singing." The song, which was accompanied by the hypnotic drone of the Veenas, filled the hall. As the tale progressed, Rama, who was seated on the throne, descended unobtrusively from there step by step, and sat on the floor with the others listening to the glorious Kavya. He sat spellbound, and he listened as though it were the story of someone else and not himself. Tears were flowing from his eyes when he sat down to listen to the Ramayana. Quote, "This story concerns the great line of kings whose founder was Manu, and which had been immortalized by the name of Ikshwaku, the son of Manu, and later by Sagara and others." Unquote. Thus began the Kavya, and Rama sat and listened as though he were a figure carved out of a block of marble. End of chapter 3. Hare Krishna.